Forward to the cloud. Okay. So here we are, everybody. I'm just going to say a few words very quickly. Here, let me undo my screen so you don't just have a voice. Hi, everybody. I'm Bridget Shearer, the Parks and Recreation Director, and I'm very happy to be part of the Belmont Talk series. That was the idea for this came from our volunteer coordinator, Susan Rendina, and she has done a fantastic job sort of curating several Belmont Talks starting in January of this year. And we've heard a variety of interesting topics by a lot of experts from around the Bay Area and on the peninsula on a variety of topics. So I think we have a great slideshow ready for us tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Delle Maxwell in the library to begin her presentation on creating a year-round native garden. So thank you, Delle. Take it away.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, it's sort of interesting trying to do Zoom and people in the same room, so we'll see what we can do. Right. Anyway, I'm Delle Maxwell. I've been a master gardener since 2014. I have a native garden at my house in Portola Valley. It's about an acre. And I'm also the board chair at San Francisco Botanical Garden, and I volunteer in the native garden there. So I have a very great interest in California native gardens. A little bit about the mission of Master Gardener program. We're all volunteers. We go through a training program that's about 3 or 4 months long. And we do this as a service to the public about home horticulture and sustainable landscape practices, and being guided by the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources folks. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. Why should I create a California native plant garden? How can it work in all seasons? What looks best in different seasons? And then a lot of inspiration pictures. Where do you see examples of native plant gardens and how do you get started? I'm really big on pictures for gardens just because I think it's a lot easier to get inspired that way rather than slides with a lot of words on them. So you're going to be seeing a lot of images in this. So the first topic, why? Yes, sir.
So it's being recorded, so separately we're able to pull up.
Yes, you'd be able to see it afterwards. Yeah, and then you'd actually be able to pause on the reference material at the end with the recording, so that might actually be useful. Okay, so why native gardens? They invite wildlife, including birds and beneficial insects. California natives are adapted to our climate here, our summer dry climate. They're naturally water-wise, sustainable and beautiful, with the exception, of course, of California native plants that grow along the stream side or places where there's a lake or something like that. But by and large, they're in a summer dry area. And California has more plant varieties than any other state, more than 6,500 species. Some sources say it's closer to 7,000. So botanists are hard at work identifying many more plant species as we speak. The reason I have a native plant garden is it creates a sense of authentic place and natural beauty that's tuned to our local natural environment. I really love having a habitat garden for insects, birds, and animals. I try to attract as many animals as possible to my garden, even including deer, because I'm trying to do a little bit of work on which plants are actually deer resistant. You can't say proof, you can say resistant. And it's a way to experience the natural rhythm of California seasons, which are very different than a lot of other states. So here, it's for the birds. This is from my garden from a while back. If you look closely down along the bottom there, you can see the teeny tiny little chicks that are just like feather balls, and Dad's standing there on the rock. And it's just about quail season now. They're just starting to come into the yard. And we have so many California poppies in our yard. The quail always come down and look for seeds. And for the pollinators, love butterflies. I've been planting milkweed in the garden, hoping for monarchs one of these days. I got checker spot caterpillars about a month ago, all over ceanothus. So we're gonna have checker spot butterflies.
What kind of plant is that?
Rissimum, that's from the High Sierra Trail up in Sequoia National Park.
You say that thing?
Irissimum, yeah. And for our little animal visitors, we had twin fawns back in 2020. I have a wildlife camera that's pointed at the water basin, so I like to record the animals that come by. We have a lot of them. I've even seen a mountain lion in our yard.
Oh, really?
Yep, yep. But we have bobcats, regular visitors, and foxes, coyotes, deer, birds, all kinds of things. And well, as you probably are all seeing in your water bills and reading in our local papers, planting native plants is a good idea for saving water. Landscaping accounts for most home water usage, probably about 70%. So this is a way to really cut back on water bills. And using native plants really brings the water usage down. You might not have to water them 3 times a week. You might do a monthly deep watering, for example. And our modern water bills can track water usage over the year and show rainfall and temperature. At least ours do. Are you guys on Cal Water here? Oh, okay. Yeah, we have Cal Water, and I log into my water bill every month and check and see what the water usage is to see how I'm doing with it. And when we renovated our garden, actually, we put in a gray water system and a rainwater collection system. So that's really helpful. Well, actually, I still have 59% full of 5,000 gallons from our, yeah, I dialed back the water usage. So I'm saving a little bit more for further along in the season. And for beauty, of course, this is a picture from San Francisco Botanical Garden in the native plant area. And right now these Western azaleas are blooming, and they're a lovely fragrant plant. And we've got a potentilla in there and toyon and a number of other native plants. I can see some cow parsnips off in the distance there in that picture too. I just took this picture the other day. But how can it work in all seasons? The big complaint that I've heard from people is that it's dried out in the summer and the fall, just when you want to be hanging around outside in your garden. So how do you make it nice? Here's an example of what a garden can look like towards the end of the season if you haven't carefully designed it. Everything looks pretty ratty. But on the other hand, this is October photograph also. I took this picture over at the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden, and they've managed in a low water situation to have all of these plants looking very beautiful and green at the same time of year. So there are a couple secrets for that. One of them is called right plant in the right place. So when you want to create an all-season garden, you have to take a few things into consideration. We live in a summer dry climate, and some plants will go dormant until the rains start. So though you just don't want to rely on those plants for every single thing in your garden. You have to do a bigger mixture. But native plants can work in all seasons if you carefully choose them. And like I mentioned, right plant in the right place is a really important concept. So probably everybody has a slightly different microclimate at their own house. So you have to learn a little bit about what your particular microclimate is and what would, if you were just out in nature and not in a residential neighborhood, what kind of a growing area do you actually live in California? And then I've got these principles that I've called foundation, infrastructure, plant foundation, as well as adding flowers in, which we all love. But you want to learn about your local plant community. Around here, the local communities are coastal sage scrub, mixed evergreen forest, redwood forest, central oak woodland, and wetland riparian. Where I live in Portola Valley, I'm mostly central oak woodland and a bit of coastal sage scrub. And if you were living closer to the Santa Cruz Mountains, you'd be getting into the redwood forest, like Portola Valley in the downtown area. That is actually a redwood forest. And as you go up the hill there, there's a lot more water available and the water table is higher and there are a bunch of seasonal streams. So two great websites to go to are calflora.org and calscape.org. And they have really extensive databases of native plants that you can index by town and plant community. Yes.
Do you know what Belmont is? Get an idea.
I pretty much the same because I was doing this for San Mateo County and San Francisco County. So it really depends on where you are in town. The calscape.org website is really terrific. I use this all the time, and it was created by the California Native Plant Society. And I often will just type in the name of a plant and a map will come up that gives you a range map and the description of the plant, what setting does it occur in, what wildlife is supported, including pollinators, landscaping info they have on the website. They even have garden design guides for native plant gardens and the common plant names and a list of nurseries on where to buy it. It's a one-stop shopping on calscape.org. And there's another useful website, and this one is set up by the University of California system. And you can search by your town, by a plant type or by water use. If you go, say, Portola Valley, and you want all of the super low water use plants, it'll come up with a list of plants that will actually grow in your area. So that's quite useful. But how about foundation infrastructure? What do I mean by that? It's not necessarily foundation, plants around the foundation of your house. I'm thinking of it as more than just a plant collection. It's understanding what your sense of place is, having an inspiration and understanding of your site, your growing site, no matter how big your personal garden is. And it's kind of the idea of having good bones in the garden, which is sometimes you could refer to that as the hardscape and how you have it set up. So examples of that would be walls, paths, some seating, using pots, things that look good all year. And, depending on how big your garden is, you can pick and choose things like that. And the style could be formal, informal, naturalistic, however, whatever sort of suits your needs. Anyway, I have a few pictures to get started here. This is taken at the Gamble Garden, Native Plant Garden. Have you all been over there?
Love that.
Yeah.
Where is it?
Gamble Garden in Palo Alto. It's just off of Embarcadero. It's about 3 acres. And it's a wonderful garden to go to any season of the year because they always have something in bloom, but they have a pretty good native plant garden that they've just put in the last few years. It's good for inspiration.
And free.
It is free. You can just drive up there and go. Pardon me? Gamble Garden. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So this is just the idea of paths and beds being part of your garden infrastructure. And so here's another one that's paths and beds, and then you add a view to it. This is my old garden before we renovated it. So it was a naturalistic style. I laid out all these beds with garden hose and had dirt delivered and shoveled dirt for about 6 months till I got the beds built up. And this is another one using the paths and beds idea. And this is a tiny little garden. It's a pollinator garden in Palo Alto. I think it's just off of Embarcadero. There are about 3 of them off of Embarcadero now that were done as a collaboration between Palo Alto and a landscape designer and a bunch of volunteers. So this is just very simple. It's use leftover logs for path edging and mulch for a path and go ahead and plant. So this is a more formalistic style right here. This is a rectilinear style. I took this picture at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Texas. And it's a nice example of a much more rigid structure that you can put native plants within. This is all native plants here, although they're Texas native plants and not California native plants. But I really like the way they laid it out. And here's another little piece of infrastructure. This is a trellis made out of twine manzanita branches that were woven into a rose trellis, those metal rose trellis things that you can buy in any garden center. And then they planted a vine on top of it, and it's just grown in. So I took a picture of this last year. And things like fences and rocks can really anchor a garden. It provides a sense of tidiness and order. Here's another one. I just took this picture in Carmel about 2 weeks ago. I thought it was such a wonderful fence that somebody had built. It's probably branches that came out of the Monterey pines and the Monterey cypresses from their yard. So, I mean, with a fence that interesting is, I mean, you could put just about any plant there and be exciting. This is another kind of a fence. If anybody's a welder in the family, you can put together something made out of rebar. This I took a picture of in Edinburgh at the Royal Botanic Garden. And walls, always a part of infrastructure. I consider water basin to be part of something in the garden too, to attract pollinators and provide interest. Year-round interest. If you have water, you're going to have year-round interest. As a matter of fact, here's a fellow that visited us in that water basin. And I think this is a Cooper's hawk. And it was just a lucky shot there with my wildlife camera. So I just figure if I have a water basin and a chair and a bird feeder and a glass of wine, I mean, I'm pretty happy sitting there in my garden watching everything that's going on. And yeah, here's the bird feeder. It has 4 little goldfinches on it. And the great thing about the native plants is that the goldfinches will get food from those too. These finches eat salvia seeds later on in the summer when the seed is all getting set. This is a fountain, a beautiful little fountain at Gamble Garden in the same native plant area. Just a recirculating fountain. That will definitely add interest into your garden, plus a beautiful sound. This is over at Tilden Park, a sort of a rustic stairway that provides structure and stonework along the edges with manzanita kind of cascading over it. This was actually from Vermont in a lovely garden. You can tell I'm sort of fond of rustic looking things. That's just my personal style. It's not everybody's personal style. Okay, and ways to fill in. I have this manzanita at home that's declining, and in about 5 years it'll probably be gone, but I'm using it as a place to hang other plants. So I have all these air plants hanging up there that seem to do quite well outside all year round. This is from a friend's garden in Maine. He built this deck, just a viewing deck. He has a lovely little meadow spot. So he just built this place to sit down. So that's part of his garden infrastructure. And he's done a lot of things like that around his property, is just finding the little power spots and then making sure that there's a place to sit, to look at it. And this is the real cheap way to have seating in your garden. I got these from the McClenahan Tree Service. They have a lot there where they dump their logs on a rastradero right near Alpine Road. And they always are glad when people come along and take some of the logs home. So we also had 2 oak trees come down in the yard. And so I asked the tree service just to slice the logs up. And so I have those as seating in the way, waiting in the wings. So plant foundations, that's the next step. You can use texture and color as design elements. You can think about shapes of the plants, barks, the branching pattern like in manzanitas. And the plants can be attractive without flowers. Flowers are the added bonus. And you can start thinking about it with trees and larger shrubs as your framework, and then move into filling in with smaller perennials, annuals, and then bulbs. And this is a long-term process too. You don't have to do it all at once. I'm adding new stuff every year, and things that don't work, well, they go out and then something new comes in. Plant foundations. I'm a big fan of planting trees, especially oak trees, if you're going to do a habitat garden. According to a number of sources, including Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, oak trees are considered keystone species because they host a lot of other wildlife, and they're kind of the backbone of the ecosystem. They host a lot of insects, which you need. If you want birds in your garden, you need to have insects in the garden. And so there are a lot of things that live on the oak trees that the birds use to feed their babies. So that's a great reason to have one in your yard. Not everybody has room for a giant coast live oak, but you could do a scrub oak, for example, which it's maybe 15 feet tall. And there are a couple of other big shrubs that work as well as a similar kind of a thing. You can add different plant types. There's trees, shrubs, vines, perennials, there's grasses, there's seasonal wildflowers, and some succulents too. I like to include plants that have a lot of evergreen foliage that's repeated in multiple sizes and forms, like manzanitas and ceanothus and things like that that look good all year long. So this is manzanita with a beautiful branching structure. These are over at Tilden Park in Berkeley. That is a really excellent native garden to go visit, especially in the springtime. It's all natives. Tilden Park. Yep, it's up above UC.
What was it? What time?
Berkeley. Yeah. And so here's another picture of a manzanita. This one's in my yard, and you can see on the ground there that it looks like snow. That's actually from the blossoms. It had so many flowers that year that it looked like it was snowing in the yard. Here's another shot of my garden. This is a mixture of texture and form with the grasses. The deer grass is one of the foundation things that I have repeated over and over in the garden, as well as salvias, manzanitas, lemonade berry, a couple of other things. They're just all over in the garden. Ceanothus, one of my favorites. There's two kinds of ceanothus in this picture. I took this picture over at the coast at the power plant over Moss Landing. And so one of the ceanothus plants is not blooming yet. It's got big leaves and it's a ground cover. And then there's another bigger one next to it that's about 15 feet tall. And the nice thing is that since they bloom at different times of the year, you're going to have flowers going for a couple of months that are staggered in time. And this sugar bush, similar to a lemonade berry, and this is a big prunable shrub that has pretty flowers as well. So this makes a good foundation plant in your yard. Ferns are always beautiful. Has anybody been to Jasper Ridge Preserve? Stanford runs it. It's off of Sand Hill Road, and you can go to their website and just make a reservation to get a docent-led tour there. It's all free, and they want people to come and look at it. So really good examples of California natives. So these are great things if you have a slightly damp or dark area. The maidenhair fern will actually go dormant in summer and look pretty ratty, but as soon as it starts to rain again, it greens up. So this is a favorite tree of mine, the buckeye. This is in a dormant phase. They usually lose their leaves around July or August, and they're completely bare until it starts to rain again, and then the leaves come out fairly quickly. You'll see them all over the place. If you're driving down 280 going south, there's a whole stand of them near Woodside Road and Sand Hill Road, or Edgewood Road, basically. Here's two pictures of buckeyes side by side in Portola Valley. The left-hand one is the one that is with the bare branches and what it looks like in February after it's rained a little bit. So they're beautiful even without leaves on them. And then they have those big seeds, those big brown seeds, which sprout pretty easily. I just planted 3 of them in my yard this year, and so we'll see what happens. Okay, another thing is using grass. This is kind of a meadow idea. The grass is the foundation. Then the grass will look pretty good all year. Even when it gets brown, it can have this beautiful shape. You can just kind of comb the dead brown grass out of it and just leave it. And then this is the added bonus of the wildflower seeds that got thrown out. And then after a year or two, you just get reseeding.
So do you have to trim those grasses or?
I don't trim them. Actually, there's this thing that you can buy that's kind of like a rake that you can just pull it out. And it actually looks better. You can cut some of them way back, but they just look really like they had a bad haircut for a long time. So I like to be a little more gentle with it. Here's 3 more foundation shrubs that you can use. The Carpinteria californica, which is quite beautiful. The holly leaf cherry in the middle has pretty flowers, and then it gets these great big sort of cherry-like berries on them. And then they're a good wildlife plant too. Those can get pretty big. I've seen them along trails, maybe 20 feet tall, something like that. But they're quite pretty. And the coffee berries are also quite pretty and also good for wildlife. They are evergreen. The Carpinteria, yeah, all of these are evergreen actually, which is why they're in this set. So I'm just showing pictures of them when they have their beautiful flower stage too. So I had the flowers a little bit after I figured out what to do with the rest of the garden infrastructure, because those are ephemeral things. And then you just have to think about what blooms at what time of year. One thing that you can do is just keep visiting the nurseries like once a month and keep track of what's up, and also visiting other gardens to see what looks good. So you can combine the perennials, the bulbs, and the annuals for variety. And it'll be a little bit different every year if you have annuals and bulbs, because the bulbs they'll propagate themselves and you'll have more, kind of like daffodils. There's a lot of California native bulbs that are quite beautiful. And then if you've got a bare spot, you can buy a nice pot and fill it up with something that's blooming at that particular time of year. That can be sort of transient. So I have some samples here of things that look good in different seasons. We'll just go all the way around the calendar. So this is this Refugiensis manzanita, the one that blooms early. Although it didn't, yeah, everything was off schedule this year. Things bloomed about a month earlier than usual. So it's a little, this is another local manzanita. This one is from Portola Valley. It's native to Portola Valley, and it's a big one. It's related to Manzanita glauca, which are so big that they're almost like trees. If you go to Henry Coe Park, there's some manzanitas there that are as big as oak trees. So it's quite exciting to see them. Here's another manzanita. These low-growing ones are over at the Water Temple. And they planted a lot of native plants over there, it's a nice place to go and wander around to see what looks good, because nobody really takes that special care of them. I think they're on their own. So it's not like I don't think anybody's irrigating them. This is the Oregon grape. This one's in my yard and it's been there ever since we moved into the house. It's never been on irrigation. Reliably comes back every year with these beautiful flowers and then these bluish purple berries. And it just keeps on spreading. So some things, you feel afraid not to water things sometimes, but it's really great when you have a spot that you never touch and then you see what really works there. And so this is one of those kind of plants. This is one of my favorites. This is from winter and early spring, and it's Ribes sanguineum, the pink flowering currant. It comes in different shades of pink and white. They're a really good understory for oaks, and they can get about 15 feet tall if they're really happy. This is an especially beautiful one up at San Francisco Botanical Garden. And spring, we've got hummingbird sage and Douglas iris, which grow quite well underneath oak trees as well. Dry shade, they're good for that. And as the name might imply, hummingbird sage definitely attracts hummingbirds. And it's fragrant in a funny sort of salvia, very pungent way. Another spring one is Ceanothus Anchor Bay. One of the great things about Anchor Bay is the deer don't eat it. The deer seem to like the the ones with the soft, big leaves the best. They don't really go for the spiny leaves so much, or the little tiny crinkly leaves. So every time I've planted something that has a soft leaf in it, forget about it. The deer just eat it, and that's that. So this is this Western azalea, and this one works better if you were living, say, in Half Moon Bay or up in San Francisco or Pacifica. This plant would work really well there. It's a little bit too hot over on this side of the hill. It needs a little bit more fog, and it has a wonderful perfume. Redbud, these grow very well without supplemental water. There are a lot of them in Portola Valley that are just kind of planted on the side of Alpine Road. Nobody does anything to them, and they look beautiful. This is one I took a picture of up at the rest stop that's on Highway 5 at the Oregon-California border, where the Klamath River goes through. And it was probably 20 feet tall. I've got about 7 of them in my yard right now, and they're really quite beautiful. They are deciduous. Okay, so here's an example of something that's like a bulb, although it's a corm actually. And like daffodils, they'll just come up in the springtime and be there for about a month, and then they just fade away, and you wouldn't remember that they were there. It's an underground storage thing it's like a bulbous root. Yeah, it's like irises grow with, yeah. Yeah, it looks a little bit like like a piece of ginger. So these are just coming out in my yard right now. I actually took this picture over at Gamble Garden in Palo Alto because they have a good sampling of plants like that there. This is the Mateo poppy. This is a picture from Golden Gate Park. They have a couple hundred square feet of these poppies that come out, and they'll probably be out in about a month. They're starting to bloom down here, but it's cooler up there. These are very low maintenance, but if you put them in a spot that they're very happy in, they can be kind of invasive. You'll see them along Highway 280. If you're driving south towards San Jose, they have a lot of them up on the side of the road there, because they're just pretty bulletproof, but they're quite beautiful when they bloom. Then you just cut them off at the end of the season down to the ground, and next year they'll be 10 feet tall again. So, or you can just leave them alone. Here's a couple kinds of salvias here. Winifred Gilman is the darker one. The yellow plant in the front is actually a Mediterranean, not a Californian native. That's a Santolina. And if you don't want to have all natives in your yard, choosing Mediterranean plants is a good idea, because they come from similar climates that have seasonal wet and dry seasons. So they're adapted to our climate here too. Another Winifred Gilman picture here. This is one of the plants that really feeds the birds in the fall. Poppies, and more poppies. These are just annual. And so what happens is at the end of the growing season, you get all these poppy pods and they burst, and each pod has a couple hundred seeds in them, and pretty soon you've got a whole field of them in your yard if they're happy there. They tend to really like gravel for some reason, not so much the mulch. I think it's harder for the roots to penetrate down into the mulch. And I think actually, this is my theory, although it might be wrong, that the birds find it harder to get the seeds out of the gravel. Because the quail do love poppy seeds. Okay, here's another annual, baby blue eyes. There's so many beautiful ones. There are lupins and goldfields and 5-spot, and there's a huge variety. Buckwheats are great plants because they're also wildlife plants for insects and birds. So they're good for a healthy ecosystem. There are a lot of different colors that they come in, and all different sizes, from ground cover to the giant ones. The Santa Cruz Island ones are quite big, from the Channel Islands, but they all grow pretty well up here. This is a penstemon, and this one is from my yard. And these things are great. It took 4 years for those to really do well in my yard, from single plants to ones that are spreading now. So now I have a huge area of these things. But these are kind of ephemeral. They're blooming like crazy now. They'll probably be blooming for another month, and then they'll look pretty sad after a while. So fortunately, they're planted near the evergreen stuff. So when they're gone, you don't really notice it quite so much. So here's something from the fall. These were at the UC Berkeley Botanical Garden. These seaside daisies. You see these growing over on the San Mateo coast, just along the bluffs. This is our native clematis. And the interesting thing about this is not the flowers so much. The flowers are simple white ones, but these are the seed heads on them. They're really beautiful. And so the seed heads stay on there for a really long time. I have one of those at home that's growing through a manzanita, and it's all gone to seed right now. So I'm just letting it sit there. Quite pretty. Those grow in the wild just fine around here without irrigation also. The one I have is not irrigated. Here's another buckwheat, Santa Cruz Island buckwheat, sort of a pinkish color. Even when the flowers are done, the flower heads turn sort of brown, but they're still kind of attractive. So you can just leave them on there for a long time and then finally just cut them off, and then the plant gets tidy looking again. Butterflies really like these. So fall, we have goldenrod. The fall color plants are nice because they tend to be yellow and orange. This is not ragweed. This is not the one that makes you sneeze unless you're specifically allergic to this particular plant. Anyway, this is the California fuchsia, which has a lot of different forms. Grows really well from about August, I don't know, through October perhaps. And it's nice to have that color before the rain starts. There are a lot of different types of the California fuchsia. Some of them grow really large. They'll grow about 3 feet tall, and this is just a ground cover version of it. And some of them come in pale peachy colors too, as well as this bright orange. I bought a few of those last year and mixed it in with this to see what it would look like. And then another thing that happens in the fall are berries. And so things like toyon have these wonderful berries on them. I usually cut these, they're all over the town in Portola Valley, and I just go around and cut them off and use them for centerpieces at Thanksgiving. So, and the birds like them too. We get western bluebirds and cedar waxwings that come through in the fall, just when these things are ripe, and they're just hanging in there, munching on them. Yeah, it's really kind of wonderful. Yeah, there's enough to go around though. There are a lot of toyon plants growing around in the Bay Area. Once you recognize them, you'll start seeing the berries everywhere. And this is one of my little favorites here because this one blooms all year long. It's golden aster, and it'll make a nice little mound. So you can start with a little plant like that, and pretty soon it's a mound that's 3 feet across. And if you just keep deadheading it, the flowers keep coming on it. So it's that little garden that I showed in the very beginning of the presentation, the Palo Alto pollinator garden with all the yellow flowers. That's what's in there. Yes. It depends on what kind it is. I have these little tiny snippers that make it really easy to cut things. Yeah. Okay, the inspiration pictures. These are like the big California wildflower pictures. I love to take pictures of plants. I'm a plant nut. What can I say? And there are just so many places that you can look for beautiful landscapes to get inspired. You can visit botanical gardens and local nurseries. A lot of the local nurseries are starting to carry native plants. There are native plant garden tours. Most of those happen in in April and May. There's some in California, on the North Bay, up in Sonoma and Marin. There's one in San Francisco. There's one for San Mateo and Santa Clara County. And there's another one for the East Bay. And so those are really great things to do because you can sign up for that and see 20 different gardens and see what people have done. And then I just tend to go around different neighborhoods and spy on everybody's gardens and see what they're growing, and then take pictures and take notes of what grows. Anyway, we've had a couple of super bloom years in the last couple of years. Well, let's see, I think the last big one was 2000 and when was it? 17 was one of them. Anyway, I go looking for native plants blooming when that happens. So these are giant bush lupins in Central California. Anybody been to Carrizo Plain? Okay. This is unreal. It's so beautiful. This is a national monument. It's inland from San Luis Obispo, Santa Maria area. And when it's a super bloom year, everything is covered with flowers, and it usually happens around the beginning of April. And it's just unbelievable. The bluish line that you see there, that's actually plants. It's not a lake. Yeah, I think it might have been lupins or something. This is in the same general area.
That Carrizo Plain, where is it close to?
Well, it's not really close to much of anything. If you drive down 101 and you get off the highway in Paso Robles and then head southeast for about another hour, you get there. It's a long drive from here.
Okay.
But it's totally worth it. And there's really nothing out there except flowers. You have to bring your lunch. Okay, here's a same area. Yeah, these are called fiddlenecks, I believe. And the yellow ones are goldfields, and then there are lupins in the background. And this is from the San Mateo coast in the springtime. So there's Phacelia growing there, and Indian paintbrush, and then it looks like an Artemisia, the light gray thing. And then there's one plant that I haven't, one that I haven't ID'd, so I'm not sure what that is. It might have little yellow flowers in it. So every year driving down Highway 1, you'll find beautiful plants like this just growing on the bluffs. And fortunately, you can find some of these things in nurseries and plant them in your yard. Lupins, tidy tips together in a grass meadow. Montera Mountain, a great place to see ceanothus, other California natives. It's a park that you can access from Pacifica, actually. And I love this kind of thing. This is the High Sierra Trail. And I take pictures of stuff like this because it gives me an inspiration for a rock garden, right? Because nature does it so beautifully without any intervention. All these plants find their own little tiny bit of soil, and it's just fabulously beautiful. I was just up at Hetch Hetchy a couple weeks ago, so I was taking pictures of paths and rocks and beds up there, just done nature's way. And the blue flowers in here are lupins. San Francisco, Vallejo Street Steps. There's a really nice little native garden planted there down the stairway that's maintained by local residents and PUC. Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, this is their meadow, which is one of their iconic bits of garden there. It's beautiful in April. So there's coral bells, there's a dudleya, there's salvias and California poppies, and I see some manzanita there in the background. This is down at the Huntington Garden. What I like about this garden right here is that it's a little bit reminiscent of an English cottage garden, except done with California native plants. And so what they've done here is they've added, there's an oak tree, a single oak tree. There's a number of deer grasses put in there. There's the Salvia apiana, or the white sage, that has the long stalks of flowers on it. And then there's the pink, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name, buckwheat. And so it's a very simple combination of plants that's just repeated over and over enough to make a composition that's really very beautiful. So that's what I meant by repeating forms throughout the garden, is that you establish kind of a rhythm. Individual flowers. This is also from the Gamble Garden.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Public computers will be shutting down in less than 10 minutes.
We'll finish up in
Please release your
time.
print jobs and ask your final questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, oh, this is the same, that pollinator garden I was telling you about in Palo Alto, and it was designed by a woman named Juanita Salisbury. And she actually gives talks around here about doing these pollinator gardens. So if you see one of her talks advertised, you might want to check it out. She's pretty inspiring. And this is a La Honda garden in June. This is, with the exception of one succulent in the back, this is all California natives, and none of this is irrigated. So it's coyote brush and Salvia sonamensis, the creeping sage, and some other big salvias in there, and some grasses. And this is a garden in October. We're sort of back to the October theme. This guy named Josh Williams, who owns the California Flora Nursery up in Fulton, which is a native plant nursery, opened up his garden on one of the garden tours in October, just to show that just at the time of year when you think nothing is going to be growing because it hasn't started to rain yet, that you might figure everything is kind of gray looking. He has a beautiful garden up there, and these are all Sonoma County native plants. So he's really narrowed his plant palette down to what grows up in Sonoma County. I'm too much of a plantaholic to do that. I get stuff from all over the place and just see if it works or not. Anyway, this is a little bit about garden infrastructure here, because he has a seating area, this really pretty little circular spot that you can sit, and then there are paths to wander through the garden and various things to look at. And the front of his house, he has a manzanita there, sort of as a stand-in for a tree, another small manzanita, some juncus grass, and a couple of other native grasses, some rocks. Yeah, it's really quite lovely. And so that's kind of it for the picture part of it. Places to visit, the San Francisco Botanical Garden, the UC Berkeley one. If you're heading out in the Central Valley, go to the UC Davis Arboretum. And Santa Cruz also has a native garden down there, which is worth seeing when it's springtime. Tilden Park, as I mentioned before, Santa Barbara. Edgewood Park is really great for looking at wildflowers in the spring. They have wildflower walks there. And I also mentioned the Jasper Ridge Biological Preserve, which is pretty pristine native plant environment. So it's interesting to go there. And there's a demonstration garden up in Sausalito as well. Garden tours, the Growing Natives, that's the one sponsored by the California Native Plant Society. Bring Back the Natives is the East Bay equivalent. And there's one in San Francisco, and then the Sonoma Marin one. I think each one of these probably has at least 20 gardens in them. So, and Gamble Garden does tours too, but they tend not to be specifically native plants. They're local gardens with different types of styles, although some might be native plants. Where do you buy them? You can buy them in Tilden Park at their yearly sale. They sell them every day at the San Francisco Botanical Garden, same at UC Berkeley, same at UC Santa Cruz. And there are a couple of seasonal sales at Hiddenville and Los Altos Hills, run by the Native Plant Society. And their nurseries, Bay Natives, Yerba Buena, Grassroots Ecology, mostly natives. California Flora, that's the guy the Josh Williams garden that I mentioned. And I don't know if any of you have gone to the Larner Seeds website, but they sell seeds online. So you can order wildflower mixes and bulbs and all kinds of California native plants. You have to keep checking back because she gathers seeds when they're ready. I bought seeds by the pound from her. Throw them out in the yard. I have her book here too that you can take a look at. There's a nursery in Fairfax. But again, go back to the California Native Plant Society website because they have a really good listing of all of the nurseries where you can buy native plants. Then there, UC Davis has these Arboretum All-Stars. They're not all native plants, but they're all water-wise plants. And so that's another thing that you can look at online. And a lot of nurseries carry these Arboretum All-Stars. So let's wrap it up here.
The library will be closing in 10 minutes. Public computers will be shutting down in less than 5 minutes. Please check out the items that you're borrowing at this time. For those using laptops, please power down your computers.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't want to compete. Anyway, we'll get through this. So it's the water. It's native gardens are water wise and naturally adapted to our summer climate. You can, as you've seen from some of these pictures, you can do year-round interest if you think about the kind of plants that you plant that have green foliage all year, or there's something else that's interesting. There's berries, there's the shape of the bark, there's the branches. And learning about what grows in our climate naturally is very helpful for doing sustainable gardening and trying to save on your water bill. And you know, we're getting in serious drought times, so we do need to be careful about that. So I have a number of references here. I think since this is going to be recorded, people can just go and find those references. As a matter of fact, I brought the books that are listed here on the table. So for those of you who are actually here, you can take a look at these in our remaining, 7.5 minutes. And again, and I also have some links to these other websites, especially the Native Plant Society stuff. Anyway, I'd like to just thank the Belmont Parks and Recreation and the Belmont Library for allowing me to do this talk here tonight. And yeah.
And any questions online?
Let's see. I don't see any here. No, I don't see any. No, it doesn't look like it. Oh, well, there's one thing in a Q&A there. Oh, it says thanks for the talk. You are welcome for that. Anyway, for those of you that are here, you might want to spend a few minutes looking at the books. And I also brought along a bag of California poppy seed pods and some Ziploc bags. So if anybody wants to take a handful of California poppy seed pods, they're right there in that bag. So.
Dale, I just want to jump in here real quick. We do have two other questions that just came.
Oh, I do? Okay.
Are there any plants to get rid of ticks? That's question one. Question two, how do I get information on gray water installation? And then how do you start?
You know what? I would go to the Master Gardener's website for information on gray water systems, because there's a number of ways you can do it, from hiring a professional to doing a laundry to landscape thing yourself. So I would recommend the Master Gardeners for that. Ticks come no matter what. So if you have anything that's kind of like a grassland, you have to check.
Sorry, what were you saying? You can treat gray laundry water to go in the garden?
You can do a laundry to landscape conversion if you have an easy way to get the pipe out through your wall. And you can just set up a piping thing with that. You have to change the kind of laundry detergent that you use that doesn't have phosphates or anything like that in it. But it's actually pretty easy. We have a very fancy system at home because we completely rebuilt our house and rebuilt the garden. And so I had a gray water system and a 5,000 gallon water collection tank installed at the same time. So I use that for the drip system.
What do you do with these?
let them dry out. You might want to put them in a paper envelope because they might get mildewy if they're in the plastic for too long. But what'll happen is they'll continue to ripen and then they'll pop and then your little bag will be full of seeds. And then you can just throw them out in the yard.
Yeah, so we've been putting them in mulch, and that's probably why we haven't had much
Yeah, you
luck
can
with
kind
them.
of
So
scrape them
we
in
have
a little
couple
bit.
gravel areas. where
Yeah,
the-
yeah. In my mulch areas, I actually just I just sort of scored the mulch a little bit and then put the seeds down and then
So
covered them
dry
up
them
a little
out
bit.
and then let
Yeah.
them pop open and then just spread them.
Yeah,
out.
yeah. And I usually do that in around November when it's starting to rain again.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, have fun with the seeds.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
excited. What was the other question?
Let's see if
There was one other
see.
question about how to start. Do you start with cardboard?
The
What-
library and the restrooms are preparing. to
what
close.
what
It will be open again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you for your consideration.
what's the question about cardboard? Is that for
I-
like doing sheet mulching or?
It might be just to kind of put down on the surface, but it sounds like we need to go to let the wonderful folks at the library
Yeah.
head home as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here in just a second. Thank you
Okay.
so much to Dell for this wonderful presentation and these beautiful photos. We will put this recording up on our Parks and Rec website. It takes us a couple days to turn that around, so it should be out there by early next week.
Okay. Well, thank you
right.
so much.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
We don't happen to know anything about this.
Yeah.
Someone said maybe a drip